Both candidates running for leadership of the Labour Party have proposed tax rises for the wealthy. The problem is, if this happened, it would probably result in less tax revenue for the government. Here is why. In economics, there's a concept called the Laffer curve. The idea is that if you set the tax rate at 0, you collect no tax. Similarly, if you set it at 100%, no one has any reason to work, at least not in your country, and so you'd collect no tax. Therefore, the optimal level is somewhere in between these two extremes. There have been lots of studies into what the optimal level is, and plenty of real-life examples to consider. I'll go through some of those in a second, but first I'll elaborate on the reasons why increasing the tax rate could lead to less tax being collected. First, the super-rich are the most mobile group there is. If you heavily tax them, they may be inclined to move to another country with lower tax rates. For example, if you are earning £300,000 in the UK, you would pay £117,000 in income tax. If you move to Singapore, you would pay £48,000. In other words, you would be 69 grand better off. If you were earning £1 million, you would be around £250,000 better off. That's quite a lot. So some people have already chosen to leave the UK at our current tax rate. If it went higher, more people would leave. The second reason increasing tax has a negative effect is that the richest people in an economy tend to be wealth creators. By that, I mean they tend to set up businesses, employ people, and spend their money roughly where they live. If the rich sod off, taking their money with them, the broader economy indirectly suffers. Thirdly, and this one is more difficult to observe, there is a theory that if people get to keep less of what they earn, they don't try as hard. People not trying as hard mean that businesses do not do as well, so fewer jobs are created, innovation suffers, all that kind of stuff. This one's a bit harder to directly observe. And lastly, if people feel like the taxes are unfair, they're more likely to try and avoid them through illegal or at least highly suspect means. Lowering taxes means people evade less. So let's look at some real-world examples. First, the UK. Post-war, the top-rated tax was very high. By the 1970s, it was 83%. In some cases, the super-rich paid an additional 15% on top of that, so effectively 98%. In 1979, the government cut the top-rated tax to 60%. Straight away, there was a big increase in tax collected. You can see that 3 years later, the proportion of total tax revenue coming from the rich stayed pretty much constant despite the cut. Next, in 1988, the government took the top-rated tax down from 60% to 40%. As you can see, the total amount of revenue the government took in from income tax massively increased from the high earners, with proportionally less money coming in from those earning less than average. It then stayed at 40% until just before the 2010 election. Labour then put the tax rate up to 50%, knowing the next government would have to put it down again. They did, to 45%, and were crucified in the press. Again, you can see the effect in the numbers. In 2010, the proportion of revenue coming from the rich fell when the new tax came in, and in 2013, when the tax rate was cut, the amount of revenue collected increased. Previously, the SNP had stated that they wanted to increase the top-rated tax from 45% to 50%, which they are now able to do in Scotland. However, having asked their civil servants to churn the numbers, they estimated that doing so would result in them collecting in £30 million less revenue. Fair play to Nicola on this occasion. When presented with the facts, she dropped the proposal, for now at least. Here is a striking example from America in the 1920s. Big tax cuts, big increase in tax collected from the wealthy. Look at it. In just a few years, the proportion of tax coming from those earning over $100,000 went from 35% to 61%. That's huge. Next, Russia. Through the 1990s, Russia really struggled to collect taxes. It even used its army to try and collect tax. However, it completely turned its fortunes round in 2001 when it cut taxes. It took the top rate of tax from 30% to 13%. In fact, it took all taxes to 13%. The next year, it was collecting 26% more in revenue. Some of that was due to the economy picking up, but tax collection rates massively improved and stayed better. Next, France. In 2013, France introduced a top-rated tax of 75%. However, after 2 years, they removed it due to it performing badly. In the first year, it directly took in €260 million, so not that much really, and the next year, only €160 million, so it was falling quite a lot. According to The Guardian, France's richest man took out Belgian nationality, and the actor Gérard Depardieu also moved across the border to Belgium before obtaining Russian citizenship. So you can see what was happening there, and that's why they got rid of the tax. So what is the optimal level of tax in terms of government revenue generation? Well, there probably isn't one fixed right number. How people respond to taxes is likely to vary over time depending on circumstances, such as what are people's best alternatives. How nice are Singapore and Dubai compared to where you live now? Here is a list of countries by their top rate of income tax. The comparison isn't perfect, as there may be other taxes going on, but you can get the vague idea. There aren't that many with tax rates massively higher than the UK. Sweden's quite high, but there's lots of discussion going on in Sweden right now that the tax is too high and is damaging their economy. Remember, if you collect less tax from the rich, you either need to cut government spending, borrow more, which is basically pushing the problem onto the next generation, or tax everyone else more, which is what they do in Sweden. You don't need to be earning much at all to pay 30% in tax. There have been lots of studies looking at the optimum rate for revenue maximisation, and all contain margins of uncertainty. A recent IFS note commented that it was difficult to model the difference between 45% and 50%. There are some economists that think it could be higher, some think it could be lower. A big review was undertaken in the UK called the Mearleys Review in 2011. It reviewed various estimates and posited that given that people also pay national insurance, income tax on its own should be no higher than 40%. So it is possible that the current top rate of tax of 45% might be losing the country tax revenue. Now these things aren't precise, and as I said, things probably change over time. It might be possible to slightly increase the top rate of tax, but given all the evidence, there is definitely a risk that even a small increase will reduce the amount of money collected in, and a large increase would almost certainly reduce revenues. So when a politician says that they're going to fund huge spending increases through more taxes on the rich, just bear in mind that they're either being untruthful or are unaware of the evidence. With taxation, it is not the case that more is always better.